because the webcams that come with computers are generally not so good. They don't do close-ups very well at all. Is yours
That's a shame. That's a shame because I'm so handsome.
Is yours because you got a better close-up than I do?
Oh, well.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I think it's probably just the computer you get. All right. Anyway, so welcome everybody to Talking Niagara. Good morning, Mike. Good morning, everybody. And well, I hope you're going to have a good day. It's raining today. I hope that breaks actually some of the heat wave that we've been having.
Yeah, it probably will. It probably will. But I think it's going to be a warm and humid summer, as usual.
Certainly warm and humid today. That's going to be the outcome, isn't it?
Well, yeah. What's going to be the temperature for today? Do you know?
I haven't a clue. Let me have
it up right now. Right now, it's only 17 degrees with a light rain. And it looks like it's going to be a pretty good day. It doesn't look like it's going to go over 23 degrees. So this is going to be rather a relief day from the heat that we've had.
Yeah, exactly. When you consider that most of our temperatures have been going up and up and up, we've been like we were talking about earlier in the week, breaking the record for Toronto. Or was that last week? Don't remember.
Yeah. Well, since 1980s or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
we're going to do the Indigenous thing. I think we were.
Yeah, the Indigenous communities in St. Catharines are actually withdrawing from a flag raising event in the upcoming Indigenous Peoples Day flag raising event in St. Catharines that normally happens every year, but they're not going to be there.
Yeah, it's kind of a protest. They didn't want to be performative. In other words, I don't know what they mean by that. I think basically get out there with their signs and stuff as protesting, but they did withdraw with protest. And you would think this is a flag raising ceremony for the Indigenous people, and you would think they'd all be there.
Yeah.
But they have issues with St. Catharines and the region because of certain issues that the local politicians aren't, in their view, are not. There's Nancy. Hi, Nancy.
She's saying it's very humid where she is in Cleveland, and so we got rain here, Nancy.
It's only about 17 degrees, which should be about I don't know what, I can't even remember what that is in Fahrenheit now.
70s, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's maybe even late 60s.
Yeah, 60s or 70s. Yeah.
About 68, 69 degrees, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I know what. I still am a Fahrenheit guy, but I still have trouble with the conversions.
But you see, here's the thing. You probably know what the temperature is if it's 85. If I said to you it's 85 Fahrenheit, you kind of get an instant picture about what the temperature is. And if I say to you it's 23 degrees centigrade, you get an instant picture of what the temperature is, right? You don't convert it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 85 is more.
Whereas I have to convert
around 30-ish, right? 30, 32, something like that.
I have to convert it because Fahrenheit. I was 11 when we dropped Fahrenheit.
I was right up there. Like it took me a long time to figure out to me, a more natural system is like Fahrenheit. Because you learn it and with feet too, you like feet, inches, in inches like the notch of your finger. A foot is almost like your foot. A yard is almost like similar to the length of your arm, and the Fahrenheit system makes it, or the metric system makes a whole lot more sense. But
Celsius system makes a whole lot more sense than the Fahrenheit one does. You know?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
But Fahrenheit, but to be fair to Fahrenheit, he when he came up with his temperature system back in the 1700s, it made a whole lot of sense the way it was. But the problem is they chose, instead of calling the water, the point at which water freezes, 0, they call it 32 degrees, because they set 0 at I think seawater freezing or something like that, which was common to all people. Everybody had a sea, so they figured, well, we'll use seawater because it's the most ubiquitous water on the planet. So we'll call that 0 when salt water freezes.
Yeah.
But Celsius comes along and says, no, it's way better just to do fresh water
because everybody, because fresh water, it comes out the tap. It's what goes into what goes into a glass, or so when it freezes.
Yeah, he came along with that system probably about 56 years after Fahrenheit came up with it.
Yeah, and better to go from 0 to 100, right? So the water goes from 0 to 100. So at 100, it's the boiling point of water, and 0 is the is the freeze point, right?
Yeah, and at sea level.
Well, then of course you got this gentleman by the name of Kelvin that says, I like the Celsius scale, but we really got to start 0 actually when everything is frozen, when nothing can live.
It's not exactly that. It's when there is no energy at all in the system. So zero degrees Kelvin is actually still theoretical, but it is the point at which no electron or no molecule has any energy. Yeah, and that's an impossible place to be, even in remote places in space, because you still get modest amounts of radiation. Yeah. So Kelvin comes along and says, well, I don't like 0 being I don't like 0 being at a point of water. I'm going to put it at the point where there is no energy at all. Any atom at all has any energy from any source, and we'll call that 0 degrees Kelvin.
Yeah, and he uses the same scale as Celsius, but
yeah.
But anyway, that's okay. So going back to the Indigenous communities withdrawing, basically the Indigenous communities, there's been a lot of friction really with the Indigenous community. We saw it.
I would just like to say that 0 degrees Dave is the perfect chilling temperature for a can of beer.
Yeah. So we saw the Indigenous community having frictions with Doug Ford last week, didn't we?
Yeah, it is an ongoing thing. We're having communication problems with our Indigenous people. We know that the Indigenous people in Canada don't live well, all in all. If you go to I've been in the reserve a couple of times in the last couple of months to watch lacrosse games, and it's a nice reserve and it's a nice community, and they seem to be doing very, very well. The Six Nations reserves there, they seem to be reasonably prosperous and well-to-do. However, by and large, the Indigenous communities in Canada have not done that well, and it's analogous basically to the Black communities in the United States and the slums and the ghettos and that, where they don't seem to be, where the population does not seem to be able to break out of this ever continuous spiral of poverty and inability. It's not their inability, but their inability to have opportunity to get out of that sort of cycle of forever poverty and ignorance. And so the government has tried to get there in different ways, but as typical governments, they don't talk to the Indigenous people much. And that is pretty much the source of the problem here. The local Indigenous people here did not go to the Indigenous flag raising because they felt that the politicians were not listening and did not consult them.
Yeah. And other municipalities of across Canada have also, had breakdowns and tensions with their local Indigenous community. But there's also some positive examples, like, for example, Moncton, where the Micmac flag is permanently flown at City Hall.
I don't know if you know anything about the Micmacs, but they were a pretty tough group of.
I know they're tough. I don't know too much about their history. Yeah.
They had the British flip backwards because of their ability to resist. They resisted the French prior to that, and the Iroquois. I don't think the Iroquois, as mighty as they were, wanted to mess with the Micmac either. So I'm very glad that a lot of the Indigenous people are finally getting their say, but the communications thing is still a very difficult issue.
I have to wonder now. Not necessarily in all communities, but in communities where we have a reasonable Indigenous population, should we have at least one member of City Council being Indigenous?
In City Council? No. Why?
I'm just asking the question. I don't have a view either way on that. I'm just asking the question.
That's kind of like saying, don't you think you should have one white person on the Indigenous Council on a reserve?
I know that. Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Because if we had an Indigenous community here, or if we had any Indigenous person that ran for office, but to have people here run on Indigenous issues in Niagara Falls, there are not a whole lot of representative. Yeah. We have a Niagara Regional Indigenous presence, but we don't have a Niagara Falls Indigenous presence. Even though I have a couple of relatives.
Well, I would say that Indigenous people should get more involved in politics.
I suppose, but they need to be. Yeah, well, they are trying in regional here, and this is a good example here because our regional Indigenous people have boycotted pretty much the flag raising ceremony on the reasons that we're not a symbolic presence, we're an actual presence. We need to be part of the discussion. And one of the number one things they brought up in this particular time is the region's sort of attitudes towards homeless encampments and how they wanted to get rid of homeless encampments and the way in which they want to treat the homeless, which has got the hackles up of the Indigenous people because they are overrepresented among the homeless.
Yeah.
And they say, we are overrepresented among the homeless. So if you're going to do something about encampments or everything, you want to talk to us, don't you?
Because you want to talk to us first. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't. We have our people among the homeless in disproportionate numbers.
Yeah. And the Association of Municipalities of Ontario is trying to encourage local governments to develop friendship declarations and formal Indigenous municipal relationship agreements. So make these things a part of our everyday presence.
Well, here it says, basically, I'll read this paragraph off. A lack of consultation by the city under an agreement upon memorandum of understanding on policies regarding Indigenous people, particularly the unhoused population, led to the move. We made a decision to step back from this flag raise. Basically, they object to first of all, not being consulted, in how to deal with the homeless, and second of all, the way in which they have proceeded.
Yeah. Mike is saying
the city, of course, has disputed this, saying, this is outside of our bounds. You're protesting in the wrong place.
Yeah. All right. Mike is saying that the only protectors of the land are the Indigenous. Our government has abandoned environmental policies.
Well, more and more of those policies are going to be abandoned because of economic needs. So it's going to be
Indigenous peoples inherit the right to govern themselves, as affirmed by Canada's Constitution Act
in 1982. Yes. Thank you, Betty Zoom.
I'm not entirely sure that's correct.
Well, they have autonomous zones.
Yes, zones, but not within general community. Within the general community.
Within their own community, I think.
Within their own community, yes, but not within the general community.
Well, it starts to get
kind of like a separation. There's a separation, unfortunately.
Where the waters get muddied, particularly out west, is in treaty zones.
Yeah,
and you take a province like Alberta, which negotiated treaties with the Indigenous peoples there years ago, rather than just shoot them all to death like they did in the United States, or like we did out east here, is that they negotiated treaty, and there's treaty area 8, treaty area 6, and all these places. So these treaties were conditional on the aspects of those treaties. And that's where the Indigenous people now have found a source of power when dealing with the government who wants to drill for more oil or dig up more minerals and stuff.
Yeah.
They're going to say, yeah, you can do that. But guess what? You're going to have to employ us. Not only that, as our environmental concerns will have to be looked upon this time, not like all the other times.
Yeah.
So now the communications thing. Now, the politicians have come back with saying, we understand what you're saying, but that's beyond our scope. What you're asking, how to deal with the homeless, and they say the protest is sort of misplaced because of that. But I don't know if they have to protest and they have to in a way that they did. Then the whole idea of a protest is to bring attention to an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Whether or not that will turn any more positively, I'm not so sure. It may bring them into the conversation more, but will they have? I think the same frustration that everyone else has felt will not be resolved. The Indigenous participation can help us understand why, or help us understand why the Indigenous people are disproportionately.
I did ask the question earlier on, and I'm serious about this question. Why are Indigenous people not involved in politics to the extent I expect they should be? If they want rights, they need to be fighting for those rights by being involved in federal parliament, provincial parliament, regional and municipal parliament.
Well, they are working. Look at the premier of Manitoba is a fellow by the name of Canoe.
Yes.
He's an Indigenous guy. And anytime he opens his mouth, boy, he's never sound like a smart dude.
Yes.
He sounds like he's composed. He's got a certain demeanor. I hope he's as smart as he sounds. But that is an extraordinarily good example.
Yeah.
You have an Indigenous person that's made it right to the very top level of government in Manitoba.
Yeah.
And he has a balanced approach.
Well, sometimes you see what I'm meaning by this is it's in one regard to stand there with your placard, waving your placard is a good thing, right? But sometimes you got to move from waving your placard to getting actually involved on the political spectrum.
Well, that's what they're talking about here.
Yeah.
We want to get involved in the political, and we're supposed to, by this memorandum, be advised. But what do? You didn't talk to us about the homeless situation. You didn't talk to us about how you're going to deal with the encampments. So we're just not just a symbolic presence. We really do want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Like we said, and when you go ahead and do things without involving us in the conversation, we don't like that.
Expect us to complain about it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's a chilling fact here that according to recent point-in-time counts, roughly 35% of unhoused people in Canada identify as Indigenous.
How many?
35%. This is Canada-wide. 35% identify as Indigenous, which is concerning for the Indigenous people because they only make up 5% of the population of Canada. So if you are overrepresented 7 times as much as anyone else, so you're 7 times more likely.
This is people who sign forms to say I'm Indigenous.
Well, they identify as Indigenous, but you're looking at Métis. You're looking at mixed race.
You come to my office, and we've got an intake form which we give out to all clients coming on board. And one of the questions on there, which is governed by the Law Society, which is, do you identify as Indigenous?
Well, in order to be a treaty Indian, I think you have to have at least 1/16. You have to have one grandparent. I think it's 1/16.
Yeah. 99% of the time, by the way, whether you answer that question yes or no, it has zero impact upon how we help you legally. All right?
Yeah.
Because, for example, if you're Indigenous and you're a tenant and you're an Indigenous person, there's 1 or 2 special rules, but not very many. Right, fighting your case at the LTB, and most of those don't apply to most Indigenous people if they're not within an Indigenous community home. For example.
Well, there are treaty rights, things like someone related to me doesn't have to pay taxes. When they buy things at a store, they don't have to pay taxes because they have the card.
So, because I would think vast majority of stores wouldn't be able to figure out how to take taxes off.
No, they do.
Yeah.
They do. Sometimes she because she looks more Caucasian, that she sometimes gets resistance.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, in fact, actually, I would have to say that I never knew what to expect when I met my first Native American or Native Canadian, and both of them looked more white than what one might have imagined. The term redskin out there didn't seem to apply. They were more white. Maybe more, let's call it Mediterranean than white.
The family I'm talking about, there was 3 kids. 2 of them looked like regular Caucasians. You wouldn't know.
Yeah,
they had Indigenous blood, but but one of them looked like he walked right off the reserve.
Yeah,
so you had 3 kids. One would definitely identifiable as Indigenous. The other 2, you'd have to prove it. But they were brother and sisters. So.
Oh yeah. No, I get it. Anyway, okay. So and obviously homelessness, they're very concerned, and they've been making a lot of voices about homelessness for quite some time.
Yeah, and basically it is we are not a symbolic presence here at these flag raising ceremonies.
Yeah.
We want to be included in the discussion. We don't agree with how you're dealing with the unhoused people, and we are overrepresented in that community. So we should really have a say at the table. You agreed to have that in your memorandum, and yet you haven't included us in that. So get over it. We're not here to wear fancy ethnic clothes just to make everyone else look good. We want a seat at the table, and we want to be part of the discussion and part of the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So and absolutely, I 100% support that. All right. Okay, moving on. Prime Minister's office announces new strengthened partnership with the European Union. Basically, Carney was on June 23rd in Belgium, in Brussels, Belgium, and he was talking with President Costa and President Costa and van der Leyen, the Prime Minister of Belgium, about forging better relations with the European Union.
Yes, this has to do with well, he's doing a pretty good job. The one thing we can thank Donald Trump for is he made it glaringly evident to everyone how vulnerable they were upon U.S. defense and U.S. trade. Now, the U.S. has rightly spoke before Trump about we cannot continue to be the world's policeman. We can't always shell out all the money or most of the money for defense. And we do want to be treated more fairly in our trade. However, the way Donald Trump's doing it is like not exactly the most diplomatic, but it has glaringly showed us how vulnerable we are.
Yeah.
So the Canada now has to look for other trade partners that work on the rules-based order. We had a deal with the U.S. through the last Trump administration called the USMCA.
Yeah.
That was just basically a rewrite of NAFTA, and it was going along well, but the U.S. abrogated that. They started putting tariffs on that was beyond the agreement. All these things have to be negotiated in the agreement, and the U.S. under Trump just sort of got rid of that and started imposing tariffs willy-nilly. So Canada has to go look for other trade partners that will abide by a rules base, and so they're trying to establish connections with the European Union that have fixed rules that you're supposed to go by.
Yeah,
and yeah, go ahead.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes an absolute lot of sense because I think there's a lot of we have a lot in common with the European Union. Quite apart from the fact that one of the other borders that we have in Canada is the European Union border with Denmark.
Yeah, we have that little island.
Well, and actually we have.
Was it about four? I think it's about what? About I don't even think it's 4 kilometers square or something.
Yeah,
it's a little
island. Yeah, but I'm also talking about, of course, the border between Greenland and the halfway point between Greenland and Canada, wherever that point is.
Well, that's a marine border, but we actually do have a land border on that one little island.
Yeah,
they couldn't decide who owned it, whether it was Canada.
And we also have this.
Split it in half.
Yeah. And we share, of course, security and defense considerations. with the European Union. And of course, okay, we can say that, okay, that's not really handled as part of the European Union, but it's more NATO than EU, but it still impacts the EU, right? And I think there's a lot of things here that about diversifying and strengthening international partnerships, which I think is one of the things that European Union's looking out for.
And that's so this is a positive thing all in all. We can establish better trade connections with the European Union and reduce our dependency on the United States, which is a good thing because seriously, we only look south, and that's the lazy way of doing it. We've never established, well, we have tried. It took us 10 years to establish the first trade agreement with the EU, but we managed to do it. Now we're building on that.
Yeah.
And the security thing is the next thing. And that's another thing I can thank Trump for, as much as I don't want to, as he's actually got everybody now in NATO and the European Union and Canada pushing for a 5% minimum expenditure on defense.
Basically considering there's a large number of the nations that are in NATO that haven't reached the 2% on GDP. I think to push for 5% at this stage is kind of a bit nuts.
Well, Canada's going to meet that threshold in 2035. And I imagine the European Union is doing the same thing. Germany is spending enormous amounts of money now.
Well, Germany,
and that's the favor we can get from Trump. Basically, he did everybody a favor by waking everybody up to the fact that you are vulnerable. Look what just happened between Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. Now, if you had to fight Russia on your own right now, you'd be in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
So but remember, he pretty much told them, look, we can't defend you all the time. You got to do more, which is exactly what they're doing. So in a sense, we owe him a favor for that.
Remember, of course, Dave, that Germany has always lived up to its requirements. Germany has some very peculiar rules about its troops, etc. It trains its troops, but it has to get a 2/3 majority of parliament in order to send its troops anywhere. And you don't see German troops going anywhere at all because it never gets the 2/3 majority of parliament to do so.
Japan has the other reservations here too. So the aggressor nations in the last war, Germany and Japan, have very strict rules upon themselves. So they won't become more imperialistic powers again. So they're very, very good at it. The Germans and Japan are very, very good at war. Anytime they engage in it, as the joke goes, you want to worry about Germany because in 1914 they declared war on not anyone. They declared it on the war, and you think that would be a 5-minute thing. But it was actually close. And 21 years later, what did they do again? They declared war on the world, and it was close again. So you want to worry about somebody that's that good at war, and the Japanese are very good. The two countries that came out of the war and prospered incredibly were Germany and Japan.
Yeah. Well, there is. But you were talking about, there is the European Union has a plan called Rearm Europe and Readiness 2030. So that's where they're looking to increase their spending.
Yeah. So Germany has lifted its spending restrictions for its government in order to boost the defense spending. It's very, very clear that the Europeans are going to have to get their act together and become more involved. Now, a place like Poland, for instance, has always put a lot of money into its defense. of course, because it feels it's very vulnerable, being right there beside Russia.
Yeah.
I don't know, like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia also spend a lot of money, but they're very small and very vulnerable. The future of NATO, if they are now poised with the situation where they don't have a superpower backing them up at this particular time, or they're going to have to get their whole act together so they can defend themselves. I think that's the reality of that. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, they didn't really think much of it. They were looking for better deals and a more peaceful process with Russia. Well, that didn't happen. Now they have to prepare for war, and as everyone says, the best way to prepare for war or prepare for peace is to prepare for war. So you have
Betty is making a point that the Prime Minister doesn't seem to live in the home that is appointed for them.
Oh, Sussex Drive?
Yeah.
That's because I think it needs repairs. It's getting old, and it's kind of like some of the presidents don't live in the White House.
It was funny actually. Back when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister, Tony Blair lived in an Islington constituency that is a 15-minute car ride from Downing Street, and a lot of the time he actually went home at weekends. Most weekends he went home to his Islington residency.
Because that's his real home, isn't it?
It's his real home. And his children primarily grew up in, continued to grow up. They didn't go to Downing Street. They stayed in Islington, so he would go back home of an evening. Not that the Prime Minister's had much of an evening.
It's a little bit safer, isn't it, for his kids, though, really?
Yeah.
Instead, some nutbar is going to make an example and shoot a mortar at 10 Downing Street. It's like that's much more effective than bombing his house in Islington.
Yeah.
So it's probably a safer alternative and probably more comfortable too. 10 Downing Street is not just one house. It includes the houses on either side of it.
Yeah, it does.
And it's a government run.
It's the office of the Prime Minister, not the home is just a back apartment.
Yeah, so seriously speaking, like you got staff members walking through and all that. Sure, you want to have a real home life, don't you?
Yeah.
So back to Carney, he's probably not living in Sussex Street, which is the.
My understanding is Sussex Street has been up for renovation for quite some time, but I don't know why they haven't started it, because Trudeau didn't live there either.
Well, he did sometimes, and sometimes not, but it needed massive renovations. And when you start doing that kind of thing, you got to look out for electronic bugs. You have to increase the security because of the war.
Yeah.
Look, the security stunk. Remember, you had people jumping the fence and going right into Chrétien's bedroom. You had the place surrounded by RCMP officers, and yet a guy jumped the fence and walked right through the yard, right into Chrétien's bedroom.
That's out of order. That is totally out of order. It's like the people who attacked Premier Ford's house the other day. That was out of order as well.
They didn't attack. Right? Well, he has been. People have shown up there with knives and bats and all kinds of other things. So that's why he has to have, for the first time, I think, in Ontario history, had to have a police presence around his personal home, which is a sad day, really. Yeah. But what happened is he didn't get attacked a few days ago. A couple of thieves tried to steal his car. Didn't realize that the place was surrounded by cops. So when they tried to jack his car, they got busted.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Betty's concern, of course, is about where the money's going, right?
Yeah,
And
money
I
is.
share that. I share that. Is spending on. I think Sussex Place needs to be done. Needs to be done up, but it needs to be the spending on it needs to be publicly accountable.
I guess, and it might not be worth it. That's a lot of money, and symbolically speaking, can we push that off until our economy's a little bit better, that kind of thing. So I would say that, yeah, how it's spent, we should have a residence for the prime minister. We always have. We also have a residence for the official opposition, and I can't remember. There's a name for that home too, for the official opposition. But I don't. These places are getting old, and they have to be renovated. And they have to be renovated in a way that they're safe. There's no electronic intrusions.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That kind of thing. So it might be an expensive process, but then again, anywhere so if you're living outside of Sussex Street or outside of Downing Street or outside the White House, the same security apparatus still has to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. But in any case, this is a deal between the
in fact, actually,
EU
security.
and Canada. Yeah.
Well, security and ancient buildings don't really go hand in hand, do they?
No. Like the White House, for instance, was built in, it was built around 1810, I think, and then the Brits,
I believe so.
The Brits and the Canadian militia just happened to march down there and burn it down.
In the War of 18, I think it was 1815 they burnt it down. Yeah.
No, I think it was 1814, maybe 1813, 1814. They burned down the White House.
Anyway, okay. So moving on, the UN is 80 years old, but can it survive?
I don't know. Part of what we were just talking about, the shift in the rules-based order, where Canada is now looking for a more secure rules-based agreement with the EU, not only on trade. Remember, this is also heavily concentrated on security too.
Yeah,
because we have to have more security partners, and this is a way for Canada to demonstrate we don't always need the U.S. to back us up. We can also help the EU, and they can help us, that sort of thing. So the West's civilization is really under threat right now, because we are democracies and we're the leading technologically, leading ideologically, but that is all being stressed at the moment, where we have authoritarian regimes like China and Russia kind of imposing themselves here and there around the world. So we have the yin and the yang, probably,
Yeah, plus also one of the biggest areas of concern in the United Nations is the Security Council. And when you've got 5 nations in the world, including Russia and China, 2 of the biggest aggressors in the world right now, that are veto holders, it almost means that the Security Council can almost never sanction anybody.
Well, the most egregious nation with a veto is the United States. They sanction everything against Israel. When the United Nations tries to tell Israel to stop their outrages in Gaza, who comes to the rescue? The whole world votes against. Says you got to have a ceasefire. Too many people are killed. The one country that vetoes it is the United States.
Yeah,
the United States has vetoed everything, every proposal to rein in the aggressiveness of Israel. They veto everything that comes on the table, which tells us it really isn't functioning well. You get the whole world with an opinion that says look, that's not well, and including half of the United States in these times, but the United States government vetoes it. That happens with China and Russia too. They go around vetoing things.
And to be clear, of course, the United Nations is not, and I repeat, not a world government. Right? United Nations was founded with the idea that we didn't want to go back to world war. So the UN Security Council was put in place as a mechanism to ensure that we never went back to a world war situation again.
Yes. Yeah, we don't want that. And even though the United Nations seems to have lost a lot of its effectiveness, particularly of late in the last few decades, the idea that the world peace, the World War III, has been avoided on a number of things. Now, the UN has not been able to reduce that wars around the world, but the UN mandate has blown up, and that's part of the problem. The United Nations mandate has become bigger and bigger and bigger, and it isn't exclusively about war, avoiding war, and dealing with refugees and that kind of thing. That was so evident and so required after World War II. It's a different state of affairs we have today, and the UN has grown and grown, and its different departments have grown and grown. And the problem is it's not administered very well. There's lots of overlapping agencies, and that is part of the problem. It's way too expensive.
Yeah,
and the U.S. was a major sponsor of the UN, but it pulled out a lot of its money long ago because things weren't being run very well, and it didn't want to waste its money. So you have all kinds of different agencies in the UN that are going to lose funding.
And
UN has got to drop. The UN has lost 20% of its funding already, which means like departments, like you might get a DEI for so the UN starts to get involved in DEI issues, or child education issues. That's going beyond its original mandate. Those things have to be dealt with, but does the UN have to do it?
Yes.
Is it obscuring their main purpose?
Yeah, exactly. And those are all fair questions to be asking in relation to the to the United Nations.
Yes. I think that's part of the problem with the United Nations. It's one big inefficient body, and Guterres and likely his successor have come up with plans to reduce the amount of money being spent and to streamline the UN agencies, because there's a lot of overlap between one agency and another.
And the other thing I do have to say is the United Nations is not a democratic organization. Yes, it has representatives of all the nations at it, but it is not a democratic organization. None, they may make decisions within their body, within the General Council, for example, on a democratic basis, on a vote basis, except, of course, when a veto comes into play. Now, the veto system is probably outdated, probably needs to be reimagined, redone for the modern era. But how do you do that? And
that's it. Like, are you going to have the most powerful nations in the world? Suddenly say, oh, okay, we're going to go along with the vote of everyone else.
But again, the United Nations is not a government. For example, the European Union is a government. The European Union is a democratic organization, whether you like it or not. It has elections. It has a monstrous bureaucracy. I think we can all agree upon that, right? The UN has a monstrous bureaucracy as well. But again, there's the difference between somebody like the European Union and the United Nations is the United Nations really does not have a democracy at all.
Well, no, if you got the permanent members of the Security Council with veto power, how could that be a democracy?
Yeah, exactly. And it's the
it's not a democracy, but they can have votes, and they do have votes, and so they're asked to vote on certain issues, and provided it doesn't get vetoed, then those issues will then carry forward. There will be initiatives to follow them. That's a big problem. But anyway, it is an agency to avoid war, and by anyone's account, the United Nations probably avoided a lot of war. Now, of course, there's wars going on everywhere. There's the Ukraine war, the Gaza war, the Sudan war, the wars that are happening in West Africa right now, the continuous problem in the Congo with Rwanda. And let's take that one as an example. Why the UN couldn't do anything about that? Because the Europeans are buying cobalt from who? They're buying it from gangster groups and M23 groups that go into the Congo and force people to mine it and then sell it at a profit. Well, what the UN is supposed to do is go in there and say, no, we're not going to buy that from you because you are a rebel terrorist group, so we're not going to buy it. But what they do is look the other way and go for the cheapest price. That's what the UN is supposed to do. So they have become very ineffective here. The EU buys its cobalt from M23 and other criminal organizations in Eastern Congo, and they buy it from Rwanda, because the cobalt then goes into Rwanda and appears to be being bought legally from the country of Rwanda. Now, that's a simple thing for the UN to stop, but they don't. Why? Because it's cheaper to do it that way. So the EU looks the other way. And this is a situation where the UN should really step in and say, all right, we're not going to buy that cobalt. We're going to buy it from the Congo. We're not going to buy it from Rwanda. And if you need UN forces, that's the place to put them. But they don't, because it's a money thing. So how well the UN is working, just like anything else, when it comes down to money, it takes a long time to find justice when there's a whole lot of money to be made.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. The Republicans attempt to discourage. Republicans' attempts to discourage lawsuits against Trump have hit a big obstacle, and basically, Republican lawmakers included a provision in President Trump's tax and immigration bill that would make it harder to sue the federal government by requiring plaintiffs to post large financial bonds before the court could issue restraining orders or injunctions. But the Senate parliamentarian ruled that this proposal violates Senate rules, making it unlikely that it'll end up in the final bill.
This is pretty interesting, really, isn't it? Because the Trump administration right now is a very odd one, that everybody that is in the Trump administration has to have a belief system. When Donald Trump says that he got ripped off in the election in 2020, they have to sign on to that. They have to say, yes, it was. They can't question it. When Donald Trump says that the nuclear sites in Iran are completely destroyed, even though there's not enough evidence yet to say that that's the case, they all have to say it was completely destroyed. So the only thing that holds back Trump is the checks and balances within the system, and one of them is the legal ones, and thank God for that. Now, what they've tried to do is limit the ability of the legal community to scrutinize what the president is doing. And that's their job, isn't it? Really?
Well, that's what the
Is
role
it legal? Is it constitutional? What he's doing?
That's what the role of the Senate parliamentarian is, because the Senate parliamentarian is looking at Senate bills and is actually questioning how the Supreme Court will look at this bill if the bill is referred to the Supreme Court. And bills that are controversial in nature.
Wait a second, I got
always.
Hold on a second.
Yep.
Hello?
Hey, how are you?
Rev, can I phone you back in 2 minutes?
Look, quickly, I had a heart attack yesterday. I'm getting ready to go in an ambulance to go to London for a handshake grab. So
Jesus Christ.
I'll call you when it's all over. So,
holy cow, man. Well, Jesus.
All right.
It was unexpected.
They don't, hearts are like that. They don't give you a chance to plan.
Anyway, so I just wanted to, Nikki said you left a message because the last time we tried to talk and you had to go into bingo. Things are looking good, and I'll let you know when I'm back home.
Okay. Good luck, Rev.
Okay.
You'll be all right, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think I'm in pretty good shape overall.
Jesus, it has something to do with the diabetes?
Oh. Wow, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'll know more after today.
Okay.
Okay.
Talk to you later, Rev.
All right. Bye-bye.
Sorry to hear that, Dave. Not something that's good.
No, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, the best wishes from everybody, I think, is the best thing to say. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And as I was basically saying, the Senate parliamentarian is looking at this from the viewpoint of what will happen with this if the Supreme Court gets hold of this.
Well, the Supreme Court, the Supreme was already the Trump administration's already had issues with the Supreme Court because basically he stacked the Supreme Court and expects them to do his bidding. However, no matter how much they're aligned with the ideology of MAGA, they still have one overriding responsibility, and that is to serve the Constitution of the United States.
Yes, exactly.
Constitution of the United States is a near religious document.
Yeah.
Now, there's interpretations of the Constitution, but they can only be interpreted so much.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Yes,
in the Constitution, and you see, no matter how the more conservative that you select a judge, the more he's going to hold the Constitution dear, and he's going to look at what the framers of the Constitution required out of this bill, require from this, and will always uphold the Constitution as opposed to new bills.
Yes. Well, in this particular case, there's what the Republicans want to do is there are legal challenges. Just to give it the quickest overview at the end of the show as I can. Yeah. There are legal challenges to the Trump administration.
Well, there's legal challenges to every administration.
What?
Right? There's challenges to our federal government as well.
Yeah, but this is different. Yeah. This is way different. I mean, that's the whole point of the article, is that there's resistance and legal challenges to the Trump administration. What the Republicans want to do is make it very difficult for these challenges to arise by making any sort of plaintiff or source of the source of the resistance, or basically pay enormous amounts of money in order to bring these matters to court.
Yeah.
So what the Republicans want to do is if you bring issues that against the administration, you have to put up a lot of money up front, which is part of the thing in the first place. If a judge feels that whatever issue you're bringing up against the government may not be justifiable and is just there to eat up the time of the government, they may impose a fee, basically to a holding fee that you could lose if your case is not legit. Kind of like the integrity commissioner.
Yeah.
When you have to put up like $500 to bring in the integrity commissioner, so you don't get one right after the other, groundless sort of.
Yeah. Well, and I understand that what you don't want is groundless lawsuits. Irrespective of whatever government it is, you don't want baseless, groundless lawsuits. But how much they're asking for. Actually, this article I noticed doesn't actually cover how much they're asking for.
See, as Trump faces lawsuits nationwide, GOP lawmakers had sought to bar the federal courts from issuing temporary restraining orders on preliminary injunctions against the federal government unless the plaintiffs post what in many cases would be a massive financial bond at the beginning of the case. This would stop them from making this. Now, the plus and minus of this is these injunctions and restraining orders can come from anywhere in the country. Yeah. And anyone, so many parts of the legal system can bring up these restraining orders, which means, are they well considered every time? That's the one argument that
I get.
But the other argument is, and of course, on the government's point of view, is these are just popping up here and there and everywhere and slowing down the functioning of government.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And we saw in our own
in our own city council, they wanted to put in a bigger amount for an integrity.
Because we're getting many integrity commissions because it only costs X amount of money to put it up. So if you have a real issue, you're going to get your money back, but you have to post $500. In this particular case, if you have an issue, you have to, the Republicans want you to post, in many cases, a huge amount of money. So the likelihood of these happening
is a huge amount of money. If you're earning $1 million, if you're a millionaire, putting up a $10,000 bond is nothing. If you're a pauper, putting up $500 bond is a fortune.
Yeah. Well, I think I better just end it here because I got the lawnmower going along outside there. Anyway, I'm going to split. Because I can't hear you half the time anyway. Every time
I know they're attacking you. I know. In any case, we come to the end of that topic anyway, and we'll move on with some other topics tomorrow. So, Dave.
Without further ado, I bid you do not forget Gaza. There is hundreds of people being killed there. There's an article we will
get
talk about tomorrow.
Yeah.
This Gaza humanitarian initiative has caused more deaths than anything. Anyway, it's hideous. All right. Have a great day on a cooler, more pleasant temperature today.
Yeah. All right.
So have a good day.
Okay. Bye.